As the IRS pushes to phase out the use of paper checks, more than 800,000 tax filers are now facing delays in getting their refunds. In order to get a direct deposit, they have 30 days to provide their banking details through an IRS online account, or they can wait 6 more weeks for a paper check. So CBS News reporter Kati Weis is following this for us. So, Kati, let's talk about that. Why might some tax filers not want to go electronic and stick with the paper checks a little bit later in the mail?
Sure. Good evening, Juliet. Actually, still about 3% of Americans use paper checks to either pay for their tax returns or to receive a paper check in the mail when they get their tax refunds. And that's a lot of people who still rely on this paper system, including my own mother. Over the weekend, I helped her pay for her taxes electronically for the first time in her life. She's in her 70s, had always been using her checkbook before this year. But this change comes after this change actually comes after something was signed by President Trump. An executive order, that's the word I'm looking for, was signed last year to look for, basically to require that all of these payments be processed electronically. But now this phase out of these paper checks is causing more than 800,000 taxpayers across the country to be experiencing a delay, essentially, in receiving their tax refund checks. And some critics of this phase out say that it's going to affect our country's most vulnerable populations, older citizens, people with disabilities, and people who also just enjoy using a cashless system as well, who don't like to have a bank, who maybe go to the post office and get a cashier's check to be able to pay for their taxes. And so now they're going to have to navigate a whole new system. In fact, my own mother, when she paid for her taxes online over the weekend, used her credit card just to try to get some extra points and was slapped with more than $100 in convenience fees. And some critics feel that that shouldn't be passed on to taxpayers as they're trying to do the right thing and be a good citizen. In fact, Louis Hawk, the CEO of UCO, a finance company that helps over 200 government agencies across the country to process their payments, he says that people deserve to have a chance or to have their own choice when it comes to how they're going to get paid by the government. And eliminating paper methods also alienates people. He believes that the IRS also did a poor job when it comes to advertising this change and warning taxpayers about the upcoming changes this tax season. Here's more of what he had to say.
The government's done a poor implementation, obviously, at the IRS level. But, taking off that payment rail to people is a bigger question. Is it the right thing to do? And, about 4%, 5% of people are unbanked. And, the U.S. government produces about 35 million to 45 million checks a year. So that's an important payment channel that potentially goes away, and it's going to alienate and cause a lot more problems for the government. So when we talk about efficiency, the government's going to be handling a lot more inbound calls, have a lot of cases to manage to get these people ultimately their money.
He also makes the point that by eliminating a paper method of payment, you're also eliminating an important offline channel that could potentially be more immune or survive a cyber attack or some kind of major outage due to a storm. Juliet?
Yeah, that is so true. Okay, let's talk about the COVID tax refund. That caught my ear. So we're also getting word the IRS might owe millions of Americans and some businesses some money back based on something that happened during the COVID pandemic. Tell us about that and how people might qualify.
Sure. So, it's hard to believe that it's been 6 years since the COVID-19 pandemic, and yet we're still feeling the ripple effects from that era of our life and in our country's history. And a federal court ruled last November that essentially the 3-year period that our country was in a federally declared disaster due to the COVID-19 pandemic, so that was 2020 to 2023, that federal code technically stipulated at that time that taxes weren't actually due until July rather than in April. So for millions of Americans who may have ended up paying late penalties or interest on their taxes for filing late during those times, they may now be eligible for a refund from the IRS. All they'll need to do is apply for that refund. In fact, a friend of mine who's a local business owner, she said a couple seasons ago, her accountant actually caught this and realized that no, you shouldn't have to pay, and helped her. So now other accountants are warning folks to, if you need to, if you think that you may have paid a late penalty, that you need to go ahead and talk with your accountant, and also check your tax record. See how much did you pay, overpay, and then from there you'll need to fill out a form. It's called Form 843. That's Form 843 to request that refund. And who knows, maybe you'll get a nice bonus check from Uncle Sam.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? Kati Weis, Katie, thank you.